and gentlemen, welcome to the do we call this the Tapped Out Double Drop Kick podcast? Does that work?
Maybe the double tap out
Yeah, the Double
podcast or
Drop
something
Kick to
like
make them
that.
tap out podcast or something. I am, of course, Nick McDaniel, but, usually I'm joined by my buddy Myron, but today I'm turning the wheels over, just turning the steering wheel over to somebody else and saying, Heath Mullikin from the Double Drop Kick podcast, listen, it's yours. You tell everybody why we're here and what we're doing.
Hey, thank you so much. I've been listening to the Tapped Out podcast for several years, have been a patron of theirs, found out about Hell Freezes Over, and even leading into it, I said, man, I want to hear the story behind that. So that's why we're here. For our patrons only, I knew I wanted to talk about things that maybe Nick and Myron didn't want out in the public. So this is a special treat, man. First time ever. We're partnering together. Hopefully this isn't the last. I would love to pull in some of the other area podcasts in and do something, but dude, you're a little over a week removed from the show. Did you ever catch up on your sleep? I know you spent time with your family this weekend. How are you feeling?
Well, actually, that was, yeah, because I said it on the show. I mean, basically, this past weekend, I completely like shut down on wrestling for a weekend. I didn't do anything whatsoever with wrestling, other than some phone calls that happen from time to time. You know how that goes. But I
Yes.
didn't do any shows, and it wasn't any knock to anybody who ran. Yes, I needed a complete just decompress week and to catch up on sleep and all that stuff. But I needed a break from wrestling for a weekend. So of
I
course I watched
totally
Extreme Rules.
Yeah, I understand that. So let's jump right in. What was the timeline from you guys are tossing around the idea, our anniversary's coming up. What's the timeline from, hey, let's do a show to choosing a date and then you're getting Gary Lamb and Dylan Freimer on board? What was the timeline like with that?
I'm going to back up even a little bit further than that. This story's been told a little, but not in depth. So, I, the backstory is when we started the podcast and we started doing like going to shows and things. My wife, like, she's always like, she lets me. Obviously, if you look at the comic books behind the wall and behind me and stuff, like, she doesn't. She kind of lets me do my own thing. Obviously, we're grown, right?
Right,
But she
right,
always said, "We'll never own a wrestling promotion." Like, I'm putting
right.
my foot down. That's one thing I'm not doing.
Yeah.
So I just never even thought about running a show. Like, there was never
Mm,
any desire to, because I knew what her reaction would be if I said it. And
right.
just one night, we're sitting there, we're on the couch just watching TV, and she kind of looked at me and said, your anniversary's coming up for your podcast, the 5 year. And I said, yeah, 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 we were talking about that. And she goes, if there ever was a time to run a show, that's probably it, right?
Right.
And I just kind of looked at her and was like, really? Like, what happened to never owning a promotion? And she's like, I mean, if it's not like you're running a promotion, you're gonna put on a show, right? I mean, just celebrate your
Right.
birthday. It makes sense, right? So that kicked off, like, that timeline. Like, I'm gonna blow your mind. That was in the summertime.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was kind of like, maybe, I was like, what can we, and I started and I was like, okay, so let's say if we do this, then of course, in my opinion, was before I even come to anything, I was at a Southern Honor show,
Mm,
and I mentioned it to Dylan, and Dylan was like, I'll help out. I mean, sure, wasn't a problem.
yeah.
And this was probably the June show, I'm
Mm,
guessing. I mean, he could probably correct me if I'm wrong, because they kind of blur, shows blur together at this point in our age,
that's
right?
right.
But
That's
I
right.
think it was literally like the June show, maybe.
Mm,
And then he kind of came on and said, hey, look, he would help out, and then I'm like, well, then I got to think of a building. And so I casually, jokingly just walked over to Gary, later in the night and was like, hey, if I ran a show, what do you think? Should I do it at, Landmark? Should I do it? He goes, why would you do it anywhere else? He's like, I'll let you use the building.
mm.
And I was like, okay, well, there's two key pieces to the puzzle done in one
Right.
night.
Right. Right.
So here's the one that blow your mind. So then the same night, this had to be the June show, I'm thinking, because I think Ox was there.
Hmm.
I mentioned it to YJ, who works for Ox for the ring rentals, And then I actually asked Ox about it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, 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 yeah." He's like, "You can use the ring. You know, it's here in the bill, whatever." So that like
Yeah.
literally in one night, I mean, I had like a booker helping me, a building, and a ring in one night.
Right. And those are your three key pieces. I mean, and really it's almost like all the major obstacles are out of your way right there.
So as you can probably guess, at that point, the accelerator got hit the floor, and we were off to the races at that point. Um, and this will probably stem into some other questions you have. But the next phase of I don't want to just run a show. Like, I mean, if I just run a show and it's no different than what Gary does at Southern Honor, so what would make anybody even want to come to see the show?
Right.
And it just was something that popped into my head of like, this guy, this guy, this guy. And so I literally started asking, talents and bookers and promoters. And listen, I think this, and we'll get into the what I think how it got there, but I
Mhm.
think at the core, it paid being nice to people for 5 years.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, we didn't really hit any obstacles as far as like there were no promoters, there were no bookers, like that pushed back in the sense of like, no, it's not happening. Like that
Right.
didn't happen.
Right.
So that's the part that I think that'll surprise a lot of people. So
Yeah. I mean, Gary mentioned this in his promo at the show that, just a couple of years ago, something like this would not have been possible. And I think he's right, but I think a lot of credit does go to you and Myron, and you've been to shows everywhere. You've built up some goodwill. People have learned to kind of trust you, and I think people want to be a part. It was something special, and um, yeah, I mean, I'm just glad it all came together. There are so many things that can happen to derail a wrestling show, and I think you may have even said it on the shows that the fact that the show happened, it's a success because there's a lot of shows that get canceled for a multitude of reasons. So,
well,
kudos.
I couldn't say the magic words because everybody knows at this point, we this is a Patreon member only, so it won't be a big deal to say the words that look, Facebook tags and like will shut your post down when you talk about COVID and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But being where we're
yes,
at,
yeah,
I mean, literally, we were afraid, like, dude, we're going to be in a lockdown again, or we're just, the numbers and attendances were crashing everywhere, as we've seen. It's just been crazy. So yeah, we were worried. Like, is this show even going to happen?
right,
That
right,
was our biggest concern. Like, I never thought like a disaster because the building it was secure, the ring was secure. Lots of the talents, things happen. We're gonna get into that, I'm sure, at some point.
mhm,
But I figure, look, there's enough people helping out here because the beauty of this show was like it was so outside. Like if you're like a comic book guy like me, I'm like
mhm.
this show took, even though it didn't, it to me it took place outside of outside of the timeline, so it
Right,
doesn't
that's right.
really affect a lot of things. Which actually will address that in that some people use the stage to actually continue those things. So I was
Yeah,
happy about that. But I think that ultimately, because the show itself was more or less, and you've heard us say it on the show, and this was 100% true. Um,
mhm,
it was for people who've listened to the podcast. It was for people who watched the podcast on Facebook. And then it became, once that we were even to that point, seeing everybody that was willing to help, I felt like, okay, now I owe it to them to, help them as much as possible. Like, how can we get them exposure? How can we, and it is what it is. Like, people can say what they want about it, but,
right,
it was trying to, at the end of the day, I said, if the fans that were there went home happy, the wrestlers enjoyed themselves and had fun, the bookers, the promoters were all happy, and I didn't lose a ton of money. Like if I could make some money on it,
yeah,
my goal honestly was I just want to break even. Like I don't want to lose money.
right,
If
right.
everybody went home happy and I didn't lose money, we were good. Like that was literally where we were at.
Well, in the times I've listened to your talk to you since then, I'm assuming I'm assuming you did okay, that your wife didn't kick you out of the house or anything. You haven't had to sell all your comic books to make up, so that's good. That's a
Yeah.
good thing. I've been on the other end of that a couple of
So,
times. It's no fun.
full out, because I know this has been topic for debate, out there. The sponsor was huge. I mean, once you get a
Right.
sponsor, when we opened the doors the day of the building, we were flat. We were in the black.
That's
So
awesome.
we knew we were okay. Lots of things. We'll get to there's something else I'll address at the end. But like I said, but as far as the money goes, we were good. And I tell people if I hope it wasn't like what we paid. We knew we were going to have to pay a little more than promotions that that what they regularly talents regularly make at their regular promotion, because we were a
Right.
one off. I mean, like, this is not something
Right.
they can consistently count on. But so my goal, like I said, was just break even or make money, and we're going to be okay. And obviously, we did that. So
Right. 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 So here's a question. When you started announcing some promotions, I think you knew you wanted to include as many people as possible. When did your mind move to, hey, what if we did all these title matches? When did that kind of idea kind of enter your head?
actually, that was the original concept. Like, that actually, when we started to say, what can we do to separate the show to be different? It was funny, and and here's the thing: like, I will, with no hesitation, I won't sit here and say like all of this was like my idea. It was not. There were many nights at Southern Honor, Southern Fried, Landmark, on and on, buildings, and we're literally just throwing stuff on the wall. And
Right.
I mean, there would be talents. Um, David Ali. I mean, there were many conversations at both, Southern Fried and Southern Honor, of me and him sitting there. Dylan's there. On and on and on. And it would just be us throwing ideas back and forth. And sometimes it was, like, hey, what if we do this? Like, we call it, Night of Champions or something like that, or whatever. And so that was always the original intent. Once I knew I had Southern Honor, because I mean, it was literally just David and Todd. Hey, like, is this something you'd be interested in?
Right.
Absolutely. Okay, here I've got a concept, I've got an idea.
Mm.
But at that point, when we first had those conversations, I don't know who their champion's going to be. I don't know where, we're not that
Right.
far along.
Right.
So it's
Right.
like, hey, we're in. There was lots of this in the early stages. We're in, but we'll fill in the details later. Like,
Right.
we'll figure the other stuff out. Give us 2 weeks or give us a month, and we'll. Hence, there was literally storyline. The match announcements were done intentionally in a way to help kind of let those stories continue out.
Well, I know you wanted to have um, All Star Special versus Undeniable, but All Star Special hadn't won the viral belts yet. So you had to hold off on that, and then you could make that announcement. You mentioned on your show the other day, you mentioned a couple of talents. You mentioned Chip Day, you mentioned Kyle Matthews, guys that were booked elsewhere that day. You knew, like you just said, some of the promotions they they said, "Hey, we're in, but we don't know who's going to be our champion. We don't know this." Who are some people that you really, really wanted on this show, but for one reason or another, you just couldn't land them?
So there was a match. It was funny. This match, and here's the kind of to go to show you that this wasn't your typical card. There were things on this show like that I just wanted, like me personally, like I wanted to see.
Right.
So one of the actual early matches that it never happened because no one, well, that's not actually, I was going to say no one actually ended up on the show, but that's not true. So Terry Lawler is a good friend of mine. He's been a friend of mine since I was a freshman in high school. He was a senior, so we've literally known each other that long. Like,
Right.
his brother just passed away. God bless his soul. He was wrestling at the time, and that just we had a mutual the love for wrestling even then, and that's kind of how we, met, started talking, etc. So one of the first matches that I had and it was approved. We just couldn't make it happen. Was we were going to have I pitched it to Terry and Frankie Paris. We were going to
Mm.
put together Team Extreme again for their
Oh
25th
wow.
anniversary, and
Yeah.
they were. And my match I wanted them versus Chip and Kyle for the Southern Honor Tag Team titles.
Oh wow.
So it was
Wow.
going to be there's lots of pieces to that people there's history there that some people in Georgia will get it, and that's what we were kind of like going with. Like, there's some stuff on our show that some people won't understand, but there'll be like a people that have followed wrestling long enough to know that Terry trained Chip,
Yeah. Right.
and Team Extreme is who they were, and are, for that matter. They've been who they are and their legacy in Georgia, and then Terry has always wanted to wrestle Kyle. He's never wrestled Kyle.
Mm.
And so it was like me giving Terry like a match that's on his bucket list that he has,
Right.
so I was like, if I can give Terry the match he wants, we've got Chip in the mix, who's the student. Team
Mm.
Extreme came into, so stuff like that was something.
Yeah.
So that was a particular match. Like, I really wanted that match.
Right.
But Chip and Kyle were on the Rampage show. So that couldn't happen. And Frankie and Terry, they were going to be out of town. They figured out, oh, we're not going to be in town. Of course, then they ended up being in town, but the Chip and Kyle had already been on. So those kind of
Right.
things happen in wrestling. But that was one particular match. Like, I would have enjoyed it. Like, it would have meant a lot to me.
Right.
And I think a lot of your Georgia, internet, independent wrestling fans would have really gotten a kick out of it, especially to see those two guys get a shot at, two, the Southern Honor Tag Team titles. So,
Yeah.
and it was funny because I asked Dylan for that match, and he didn't hesitate. I was like, hey, I'm
Mm.
thinking that, Team Extreme, Frankie and Terry versus them, and he goes, oh yeah, absolutely, that'd be a great match. And I was like, caught me off guard. But yeah, that's the kind of some stuff like that I wanted.
So that's one reason right there. You got to come back and do another show just so you can have that match.
Maybe, maybe. Um, Another match that we wanted, like originally in the cards, and I think this will probably stem in because I knew this will be one that you would eventually get to. Originally, it was I wanted Logan Creed versus Joe Black.
Hmm.
And then of course the book, that's where I'm sure you've got a question that you're going to head into. Things happened and that spiraled out, and that's probably one of the stories of when I just began going, it's wrestling. They're literally responses to things was, and it's just wrestling. It is what it
Right.
is.
Right. Right. So you had it was going to be Logan. We'll just go ahead and talk about this. It was going to be Logan and Joe Black. Then you had Davey Richards and Joe Black. They both end up on the same show. And at first I heard that it was MLW, but it wasn't MLW. So what's the insider baseball on?
So, and I don't. I'll walk a fine line here because I'm not. There's nothing negative to say in the weirdest way,
Right.
but it's just what happened. So Logan was forthcoming enough that it was like, hey, I got this other opportunity. And look, I always tell people, dude, it's show business, not show friends.
Right,
Like,
right,
if
right.
you're gonna make more money over there and then substantially more money over there, dude,
Yeah.
go get your money. Look, I get
Right.
it. I totally understand. So there was never, and I want to repeat, there was never any ill will towards Logan about being on another show
Right.
because
Right.
he was on the Rampage show and then he ended up on the show in Mississippi.
Yeah.
So I mean, he was two shows removed from me by the time it happened, the night of the show.
Right.
So Davey, we had Davey, he committed, and then we sent him the poster so he could start promoting it. And the response was, "Dude, I'm on a show. I'm sorry, MLW booked me on a show or something." I don't know the exact details, but something to the effect. I think MLW did send him out to that show.
Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha. Okay.
so that's kind of where the MLW piece came from. Like I said, I get it, dude. That's his gig. Like, that's his
Yeah.
big time gig.
Right.
My question was, but were you gonna? Had we not sent you the poster, when were we gonna find this out?
Right.
Because literally that
Right.
was the response to the poster being sent. So,
You
we're
know,
kind of, yeah. So again, I began it's wrestling. I mean, so then
right.
we were in a,
Yeah, and I think sometimes we as wrestling fans, we want there to be dirt. and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like you've been saying, it's just wrestling.
Yeah, no, seriously, and that's it. Because everybody was everybody just assumed because it boom, 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 piece to piece to piece. It was like, oh, there's this huge, and it's like, no, I mean, Court pays Davey and Logan bigger checks than I even remotely was thinking about paying guys, and
Right.
it's factual. So, and especially when they have contracts with them. So if he says go, they're gonna go. I mean, like I said, it is what it is.
Well, you replace those guys with JD Drake. So Mark worked third shift Thursday night. He gets off Friday morning at 7:30. And we had been texting. I said, "Hey man, I got tickets to the show. I know you're working. Do you want to go?" I said, "JD Drake's wrestling. Joe Black is like, Drake's wrestling. I'm going." So he literally drove to Canton on about 2 hours sleep because he wanted to see. I mean, and that was a really, really great match.
Great match.
One, I don't know has that ever happened anywhere before?
I don't think so. I mean, that was because that was my whole thing. So, um, I cannot, and this is going to happen a lot throughout the process, but I cannot put over Joe Black enough for the patience of, the Logan match falls through, the Davey match falls through, we finally get him Drake, and it's, and because you got to think about it in a weird way. In his brain, he probably went through 3 different matches.
Right.
He
Right.
how he would wrestle Joe or Logan. Then for Davey, it's probably going to be a technical match, and they're going to have it. Then Drake's coming in and like, oh no, now they're going to just pound each other and be
Right. Just
physical.
don't chop each other.
So yeah, and so he was as professional and as awesome of a guy to go through that process. I mean, to boom, 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 and but that he that's I was really happy with that. And by the way, at the end of the day, I don't know that I could have gotten a nicer guy in there than JD Drake. He was a super nice guy as well. I mean, he was one of the surprises, which we'll get to later, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, we mentioned the Black and Drake match, being kind of this first time thing. There were a couple of matches on here because you're bringing in guys that really wrestle in different universes than some of these Georgia guys, like John Davis and David Ali. I don't know where they would be really crossing paths. They don't really wrestle in the same promotion, so those matches were very very intriguing. So yeah, the next question. I mean, you've never taken on something like this, booking a wrestling show, and I'm sure you went in and you had. I mean, you got Dylan, you got guys helping you, but I'm sure you had expectations or thoughts of what it would be like. So what were some of the biggest surprises through this whole process?
Again, it's wrestling, so it wasn't personal, but a lot of it to me is I'm used to this. We agree on a date, we agree on a number, we're done, kind of thing.
Right.
So and it's like I said, I'm cool with it. It's nothing bad. But that
Right.
was just different. Um, I knew we were going to face the oh well, but the thing about everybody being upfront and honest, and we've discussed this before. Like, hey, you can use this guy. He's the champion, but he's got to come out as the champion. So how do we get there? So I think a lot of what I kind of learned along the way was you've got to be creative to make it entertaining.
Right.
Even though some people are like, oh, I knew what the ending was going to be.
Mm.
Okay, well, you knew what the ending for All Star and Undeniable was going to be, but did you see that coming?
Right.
Did you see that
Right.
ending coming? So again, okay, so yeah, but so I think that ultimately was kind of the challenge is trying to make it happen. I tried to be a little more creative. I was like as far as promoters and some wrestlers, and some got more involved than others, sending in the promos, and we were airing them to try to get it out there a little bit. So that was something. So some of the things that I learned along the way, I've kind of told promoters. I'm like, hey, you could probably try this. I don't
Mm.
know if it'll work for you or not, but hey, it's something to learn from. So there's that. I mean, as far as the actual stuff goes, the problem is that I don't have a lot of negatives because I had, Dylan. Dylan was my right hand through this whole thing. I'm honest. I mean,
Yeah.
Dylan probably sick of hearing from me at one point. So I was like, when this was all over, I'm like, I'm going to leave Dylan alone for a few days because he's heard from me pretty much every day for the last, month.
Right.
Todd coming in, he ran the back. So he was back there kind of controlling all that craziness the day of and the night of.
Right.
Look, Hankins was super involved in the promos and, Anarchy and PCW all being involved. And of course, oh, by the way, he was in a tag match for the Viral, so he was heavily involved.
Right.
So there was just so many people, and I can't stress that enough. There were so many people helping. There was never a point that I was like, I was like, I'm done, in the sense of like, because it was so many pieces. I can't tell you the number of times Dylan was like, don't worry about it, man. We'll figure it out. We'll worry about it tomorrow. And it was just, and I can't tell you the number of times of Todd being like, you want to do this every month now? Making joke, and you're like, no, absolutely not. So, it's logistics. I'll tell you this, like, obviously there was, little things happened the day of, and as far as running an event, hence why we had, Gary was there to kind of help do some of that. But it's like Gary taught me a great lesson. He said to me when some things went wrong, he was like, hey, this went wrong, but you fixed it really fast. Because you plan for everything until the one thing happens that you didn't plan for.
Right.
And then you got to just deal with it. So there was that, so.
And it helps, it helps to have the wrestling guys there because they're used to working on the fly. Wrestling is, it is an unpredictable business. And guys, as far as I know, you didn't have anybody call at 5 o'clock, hey, I'm in traffic, or I got a flat tire. Or
oh, no, we did. Yeah, we did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
At one point, the main event, they were in the back planning out a triple threat because Cyrus hadn't showed up yet.
Okay.
He literally showed up like mid-show. Like the show was running, and it was traffic. It wasn't anything bad on his part. Just literally, he got there like the show was running. So they were literally at one point back there going, okay, if he doesn't show, then we're doing this, and so they had gotten to that point. So it did happen. Yeah. But my thing was, Todd's back there, Dylan's up here, we'll be fine.
That's the thing that I kind of learned is you have to have these guys that are like the promoter and the booker and running the back. You have to have different people doing that.
Yeah.
You've got to have somebody. Brian Kanabrowski from PWX does a really good job. He's out in the audience. He's talking to people. He's making sure people have what they need. His booker and his technical people, they're all in the back handling that stuff. He's handling his stuff. I'm sure that's a relationship. Gary Lamb's walking about. He's shaking hands and kissing babies.
And you probably saw that was my role. Like before the show started, I was trying to, hey, if you're having trouble finding your seats, let me help you find your seat. If you need anything, let somebody know, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, exactly. Now that comes from my hospitality background back in the day of just trying to go out of my way for that. But yeah, there was no way, like, I wasn't dumb enough to think, like, or naive enough, dumb enough, whatever word we want to say. Like, I wasn't running the back. Like, I wasn't going to kid myself and say, like, hey, you're going to go back there and tell them all, The closest thing it came to anything like from a wrestling standpoint was the Disruptor match. Like, we had one particular thing we wanted to go, like, and then the Lucha match, there was one particular thing that had to happen. So, so I did get Mac, Vari hadn't gotten there yet, and Slim, and it was like, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking. This is the ending. I just want to make sure we're all clear. This is what's going to happen. And they were like, okay, well, what about the rest of it? And I'm like, I honestly don't care. There's so much talent in that ring, it doesn't really matter. You dance for as long as time as Todd tells you have. You just get to this point and get, like, literally, here's the finish. Have fun for the rest of the match. Just get to this point. Tell that story, and that's on you, because there was so much talent in that match. There was like, why am I going to sit here and, like, there's no point. And I think sometimes maybe that sometimes can be overdone and it gets too complicated. And of course, the Lucha match, this was the funniest, in my opinion. Everybody laughed. So the Lucha Libre Knockouts company, it's an NFT company. They're out of South America. a South American NFT company, funded the Hell Freezes Over tour show,
That's
right? So that that's crazy enough when you hear it.
yeah.
So they sent me that banner. Actually, two. I have one here, and I'll tell you where the other one went in a second. So I had one folded up. I put it on the time, over by Diana on the table, and so they were out there talking about their match, and I said, "Hey guys, I don't want to interrupt as far as the match goes. I don't care." I said, "I just need one thing to be understood. When you win, I need that banner in front of the three of you, facing hard cam. I need a shot with that banner being, because that's a sponsor." Like, so you can imagine, like, literally, this is the money, folks. This is the people that paid to run the show.
Right.
So I don't care. And I literally, and it was fun. And I said to them, I don't care if the match sucks. It won't, because there's so much talent in there. But I honestly, and I actually looked at Ellie and told her, I said, Ellie, you have one job, as far as I'm concerned, in this match. When that match is over, get to that table, get that banner, and get in the ring and give me that money. And she's like, okay, you got it. And I'm like, you're good? And she goes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And God bless her. Look, I've heard, because when I booked them, since we're Patreon members only, I heard people like, oh, I don't know, man. They can be difficult to work with. No issues with booking them.
Right.
Gave me the rate. I said yes. They were done.
Yeah. Yeah.
2, when I said that, when that match was over, I don't know if you paid attention. 1, 2, 3, she rolls out of the ring, goes straight to the table, gets the banner, and I got so many shots of, with that banner in front of them. I sent it to the company the next day, thrilled as can be.
Yeah.
I would tell anybody as professional, listen, they did exactly what I needed them to do. So much so that Loco was carrying that thing out, on his back, over his shoulders. I got all those pictures, sent them to him. He asked me in the back, could he have that? And I said, absolutely. I've got 2. Wow. I've got 2. I'm like, take it. Cool. You're good, man.
That's awesome.
Awesome. So that's that's as far as matches go. Mm-hmm. That was that was the extent of like me getting involved in the wrestling part of it, like the matches themselves. The rest of them, it was like, guys, your promoter, your booker, they're telling you who's going to win, what's the finish, whatever. The rest of it's just getting there. I mean, and it was like, I talked to Cyrus, I talked to, everybody, and it's like, hey, I don't know, man. Y'all go in there and have fun.
Right.
I just want total chaos. I mean, how about that? That's it. That's what I want. So I think that ultimately was, like I said, is deep. Now, the PCW Dealer's Choice Championship, the 24/7 thing.
Yeah.
There was a lesson learned there. Listen, I will tell everybody. So I've uploaded it. The Patreon members have seen it kind of in sequence. The video, I put it up, like the 3 scenes that were pre-taped, because we taped those Wednesday, a couple days prior.
Right.
So that part, look, I love it or hate it. There's tons of that you're gonna. That hate or that love is on me.
Yeah.
Because that was, there was lots of that was, me up there kind of with it. But again, it was everybody that showed up. I didn't even know who was showing up, by the way, Heath. No clue. I put an invite out.
Talent.
So the guys, when they showed up, we literally sat down. I go, okay, guerrilla style filming. Like, what do we? And we figured it out. We walked that building, and just on the fly made up all that stuff.
Yeah.
And when I mean we, the talent, like we're like, hey, what if we did this? And what if we did this? And what if we did that? And I'm open to it, and I'm rolling with it. And that was how I did get my Terry Lawler moment. Because he wasn't on the show at that point. It was too late, but I was adamant I would get him on there. So, and I did. So, and he's the oldest PCW Dealer's Choice champion ever, as he likes to brag. So,
well, I haven't had a chance to go watch that video yet, but that's pretty cool. So you talked about lesson learned. So in hindsight, what are some things you would change about the show?
Listen, it was funny because somebody was trying to critique it and say oh, it was too long. And I was like, well, no shit, it was too long. I could have told you that. I mean, but here's the thing. Did it go longer than I thought it would? Yes. But here's my thing. I tried to tell somebody, here's when we started, we knew it was going to be a long show.
Right.
And they were like, well, why did you do that? Our ticket prices were higher. We felt like we needed to give them more than a 2-hour, 2-hour, whatever show.
Yeah.
Two, look, at that point, and still to this point, maybe, like, this was a one and done. Like, you're going to do everything. If you could, you're going to run one show. You're going to get everything you've wanted to do on this one show because you may never do another one again. So at that point, you kind of know it's probably going to go long, right?
Right.
So,
yeah.
So like, to say it was too long, I was like, okay, don't use that as something telling me like, oh, it was bad because it was too long. I knew the day of the show it was going to be too long. It wasn't like it was like at that night, but it was about 15 or 20 minutes longer than I thought it was going to be. Right. But,
So the show started at 8. There was very short intermission. What time did the show actually end?
Honestly, I wished I could tell you because I was even running. I think it was like 11. Somebody told me it was like 11:20. So it was over 3 hours. It was like 3:20 maybe.
Right.
So that's kind of why I said I thought it was going to be 3 hours. Like, I thought we were going to be right at 11. Lesson learned. If it ever happened again, I would probably run it on Saturday and not on Friday. And I would start at 7.
Right. If you had that, it's really not that, that big of a deal. The one thing that, and I said this on our Patreon, because whenever I had thought about running, a double drop kick wrestling show or whatever, I always thought Battle of the Belts, Clash of Champions, something like that, And again, I felt like I had built relationships with various promotions to say, hey, you give me a match, you give me a title match, you give me a title match. What I found, though, with your show is a good show. All the matches good. I didn't feel that any – we're talking about the show being long, but there wasn't a single match where I felt like, you know what, that match overstayed its welcome a little bit. They were all good, the right length. But I felt like having the title matches, it kind of created this I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, there wasn't like normally in a show there's a single thread through the show. And I felt it was missing that. It's nobody's fault, it's not a bad thing, but I just noticed that and I felt like, okay, there's not this unifying thing that's holding everything together. What did you think about that?
Yeah, but having that was we had that come up in conversations, but somebody brought up a great point. It's 8 promotions. You're never like you can't really tie thing. Now you'll notice we did go out of our way to try. Yeah. We put the 24/7 things. We tried to space those out enough that it would kind of have that. So like that was supposed to be announced earlier. Like, hey, throughout the night, on the, we're going to have the 24, the PCW Dealer's Choice title defended through 24/7 rules. So then when those things aired, it would be, I think people figured it out kind of during the first one, but at least it was, could have been earlier, but that's a whole other argument.
Right.
But then, of course, like, look, the first half of the show was like setting the table, but we felt like when we went into the Lucha, IWE, Southern Honor, those matches all, were together. And then, of course, the ending of the show even tied the end of the main event back to, David's matches prior and kind of getting everybody involved. So that's where we kicked in the effort of, trying to tie all of that bunch together after intermission, which is why those were all placed obviously where they were, trying to run that gambit of, like these are all connected in a way. The first ones was like, watch these, like watch this because this is going to be fun. Right. So that was the concept and the theory. So yes, the answer to your question is it's difficult to do when you're bringing in so many different moving parts and different like if we had 7 matches, 3 or 4 promotions, I bet you it would be a lot easier because we could, especially, look, if we used, and I'm not saying this is who I would use, I'm saying if we used IWE, Southern Honor, Southern Fried, and maybe Anarchy. Like a lot of those same pieces. Like we could intertwine those because there's so many of the same pieces that you could do dual things with. Because we did talk about like, hey, what if we brought a guy in with 2 belts?
Yeah.
And he had to defend something like that. You'd be crazy. Some of the ideas that came out were like, well, what if, by the way, the dealer's choice, that was literally a midnight in bed, like idea. Like I'm sitting there on my phone and I'm like, I see Dylan's little green dot on and I'm like, hey, what if? And I sent that to him. The response I got is, I don't think Hankins will go for it. So I looked up at Hankins' green dots there. I go, hey, Hank, I was wondering what if. I love it. Yeah. It was, I'm like, done. Like, and so like that happened. So I just think, yeah. So I think it's easier if you had less moving parts, but like we wanted to have where at one point it was going to be all titles. Like literally every match was going to have a title involved. But we ended up going like, okay, well, Lucha rules, look, it was a sponsor thing. Everybody, why was that match? Well, I mean, there were lots of kids in the crowd and like, people that loved that match. It was a great match, I thought. I was happy, obviously, because of the ending. I got what I wanted, so I was happy,
Right.
And sponsors are happy, so that's more important than anything, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And then, in Joe and JD Drake, it was a special attraction match. It was just, like I said, I had not seen it anywhere. I did not know if it had happened anywhere. And we thought it was, yeah. So, but, I think that when you start bringing in all the belts, it gets a little more complicated. And I think people have to realize, like, how complicated that can get.
Right. You mentioned Drake real quick. You talked about a surprise with him earlier. So I guess this is kind of a leading question. You have to go in. You knew some of these folks, but you've got to be coming in with some preconceived notions about people. Obviously, people had said, "Oh, you don't want to book the international superstars." What were some things that surprised you about some other people? Were there some people that were like, "Man, they were a lot more pleasant than I thought," or were there some people who was like, "That guy's a little bit too big for his britches," or anything like that?
Well, luckily there was really not anybody that was that way. And again, a lot of it was just knowing a lot of them going in. Now Drake and I had met John Davis at Viral. It was Owen Knight had introduced me to him at the backstage at Viral the night you were there. That night he introduced me, yeah. And so we had at least met. Mm-hmm. But like, you were even back there. I think it was literally a couple minutes, maybe. Right. So I was super, he was super nice guy. JD Drake honestly was the one that was the biggest surprise. I mean, because I was like, he could have came in, he could have played big shot if he wanted to, got his payday and left. Because at one point it was funny. He was like, he thought he was going to be leaving at intermission, after intermission.
Right.
Later in the night, I had to go back into the back again. He was still there. And I made a joke with him. I was just like, dude, I thought you were leaving. Like, I thought you were leaving at intermission. You know how it is, and he's cutting up and joking around about it. And so I think like that was kind of a little bit of a surprise. But like most of the talents that are local, or, when I say local, that we've seen and we know, they were on the card for a reason.
Right.
Like, it was people that like I knew, and I was like, they're not going to be a problem. They're going to be good to work with. There were people that volunteered. Mm-hmm. Like, dude, I really want on the show. Is there anything you can do? Like they're like, I'm going to protect one guy who messaged me and was like, dude, I'll do the show for nothing. I want on the show. It sounds like it's going to be so much fun. Okay. Wow. By the way, for the record, I'm not going to tell you who it was, but 2, I did pay the guy obviously because I wouldn't do that. But, and I think honestly, I think that, hearing what I told you about the superstars, I mean, like I had heard that, I'd heard places say they were difficult. I didn't see that in the least. So I don't know the hows and the whys of anybody that says that. And they did everything I asked and they went above and beyond. So if I were doing another show, they're probably going to be on it.
Right.
So that's the best thing I can say. I mean, I could sit here, like I said, all night and go like, look, David Ali look, everybody's like, oh God, it was the David Ali show. He was on the show. He was all over the show, and I was like, well, he was helping a lot along the way.
Right. And
So
he's high up in many promotions.
So I will tell you that I didn't. So I forgot this story. David triggered it. So originally, the IWE Women's Championship was going to be defended on the show. That was like, Danny was going to be defending it. We were looking for female talents, and whatever. She got offered a great booking. She was up in New York, New Jersey, somewhere for that weekend. And like I said earlier, go get it. Like I'm like, there's you go get your money. It's not, whatever. So she took the, that. So then we didn't have a women's match, and that's kind of how we ended up with David being in the 2 matches and all of that kind of stuff. But while like we were looking for Danny an opponent, like he's messaging me and giving me those ideas. Hey, what about this person? What about this person? Like what about? And then it was like, hey, I can talk to. And even when we got to the Lucha, the mystery opponent, we knew it was going to be a woman. It was going to be a female. We were just trying to figure out who, because we went through a couple there too. Like this was going to be this person, and that fell through. And this, now none of those were like committed and then backed out or anything. It just kind of happened. So in the same thing, like he's like, hey, what about this person? What about it? So like he was going out of his way to help, like get people on the card. It was like, hey, we're looking for another person for the 6-man. Carly, man, you got to get Carly on there. Like you're absolutely right. Good idea. And that led us into the stories, and so those things kind of evolved as we went. So with all, I'm trying to go through the card in my head because I don't want to leave anybody off. I mean, like look, the main event was what it was, right? I mean, it was like those 4 studs went out there and just destroyed, the whole building. It felt like, and that was kind of what we knew. That's why it had to go on last, right? That was the whole. And every one of those, hey, were you happy? Heck yeah, man. That was everything we wanted it to be. But I didn't, kind of the same thing. It was like, I don't think with those 4 in the ring, there was no way that match was going to be bad.
Right.
There was too much experience and too much talent in that ring with those 4 guys. Cyrus, Gunner, Judas, and Jeter, they've all been around the block, And
they all know each other, and they're comfortable with each other.
And that was the history. Like we wanted that. So everybody asked, I'm kind of going off on these little tangents along the way. So just kind of cattle me if you need to.
Oh,
so,
good.
We had a 3-man commentary booth. Mm-hmm. It was JJ, John the Body Johnson, and Gerard and Brandon from the Southern Honor Crew. And then I don't even know if you noticed, Nigel was there. Nigel Sherrod was there.
Yeah.
And so he jumped in, and JJ and JJ and Nigel did the Disruptor match and the Anarchy match because they have history. They know the history of those promotions, and I wanted to add that to it, to where there was more depth to the story than just, so like they knew the background of these guys and the history of these guys. So because Nigel and JJ called the Disruptor matches.
Right.
So they knew the history there of, like, because a lot of people are like, oh, there's 3 great ring, but you don't realize Vari beat Slim J to have his belt.
Right.
So, but it was cool to have the commentary team know those things, to put those pieces together. And I thought that was kind of the cool, like, for those, like, 4 guys to basically have no egos for commentary. Like, because it was like, hey, Brandon, Gerard, hey, I know this is going to be weird. We're going to do a 3-man booth that you're not used to, because you're used to 2. And not only are we going to do that, in these 2 matches, Gerard, you're going to bump out of the seat for a minute. Nigel's going to jump in. Now, we put those matches back to back to make that easy.
Right.
But it was like, okay, you're going to call, these 2 are going to call these. And Brandon completely went silent on that one as well. So they went straight 2-man booth on those 2 matches, and then kicked it back in. So the biggest thing I can say is what I was happy about is I didn't really see much of the ego of anybody, like, getting in their way. It was just something that was cool to see to me, that a lot of people were just willing to, hey, what do you need? What do you want me to do? That kind of thing, and kind of step up and do that. So,
well, I think that goes back to, again, you guys are well liked in Georgia, and people wanted this to be They wanted to bring their A game for you. And this was definitely a show that I'm like really excited to go back and watch with the commentary because I'm not as familiar with Georgia wrestling as most of the fans that were there. So I'm excited to go back and hear, like you said, some of the stories and what's the history behind this. Because that's one of the great things. On the way down, I told Mark, I said, Mark, you could watch any Southern Honor show, and their commentators will bring you up to speed.
Yeah.
If you've never watched a Southern Honor show, they make you feel like you know exactly what's going on. They tell really great stories. So I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see all that happen.
And that just real quick, that team is very good. Like obviously they were commentators of the year last year, but I can't put like JJ doesn't get enough love, I don't think, because JJ's the guy who messages me like on a regular basis. Card's still the same. Everything's good because he knows wrestling, right? He's been around wrestling forever. Do you have an order? Do you have all that stuff? Like JJ's the guy that shows up with 10 pages of notes for a card, because he wants to point out, he's involved with Anarchy, right? He wants to be able to tell you, how did we get here? Tetchy doesn't wrestle for Anarchy, but JJ works with Southern Fried and knows Tetchy's history, so he can tell you how we ended up here, how Proc, and that. So obviously, like, that match wasn't even supposed to happen. There's another story. Do you want to hear that one real quick? I'll throw this one in before we go too long.
Yeah, please. That's what we're here for.
So, literally the night before the show, we're told that Will Caution can't make it. He wasn't medically cleared to wrestle.
Gotcha.
That match was booked officially the day of the show. So Proc and Tetchy was booked the morning of the show.
Wow.
I kind of had already planted the seeds. I called Proc, talked to him. But here's what people like. The Anarchy champions don't have their belt.
Oh.
So like I had that belt I had to get that belt to the building. So that became the challenge. It was like, okay, we can do this, but how do we get your belt there? And that wasn't as hard to figure out as you think. But it was still like, okay, so we're good. This is good. And so the day of, these two are trying to figure it out.
Yeah. You mentioned, or Gary mentioned his promo, some of the other promoters that were there. One of the things, probably the thing I talked about on Patreon the most leading up to this show, that I was interested in what was going to happen in the ring. I was very curious about what was going to happen backstage. Because I know most of those wrestlers have been around each other. They've worked different promotions, but some of those promoters had never been in the same room with each other. I was very intrigued to see how that played out. And a lot of them didn't show up. And I've mentioned this, and this is what I want your take on. Gary Lamb was pacing like a caged tiger, and that may be his normal thing. Yeah, but I felt like Gary showed up for a fight, or not a fight, but he showed up to kind of be like, hey, this is my house, and, welcome to my house. And, like, I guess I was hoping there'd be some fireworks, and there weren't any fireworks, which is probably a good thing for your show, because there wasn't any drama or anything that I know
of. So originally there was supposed to be a segment with all of the promoters in the ring. That was planned. Like literally, like the morning of, we found out. Like I try not to get into the whys, but we found out particularly 2 promoters wouldn't be there the morning of.
Right.
So, when we got to the building, like we originally thought like this segment's happening. Like we're going to have Gary Lamb, David Manders, Timothy Blackman, Joshua Hancock, Hankins was going to be in there. I'm trying to go in my head who all was actually going to
Rick Michaels.
No, I think Hankins was going to kind of represent PCW and Anarchy both. I would have had Rick. I have no qualms with it. I'd love for him to get in there. That's just not his role with Anarchy right now. So, but yeah, so that segment was supposed to happen. And if you want to hear the really inside baseball part, that was when the 24/7 thing was supposed to end.
Right.
So we had to rebook that whole ending the day of because that segment got scrapped.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Wow.
how you saw that end was not how it was supposed to end originally.
Wow.
We had this really funny segment. I'll pitch it off you and see. So basically, Hunter James was the champion at the end, as you probably that came out. We wanted Hunter James to run like he's running to try to get out of the building, but he couldn't resist because this kid is arrogant, he's cocky, and he's a showboat. That he couldn't resist jumping into the ring when all of the promoters were in the ring and handing out business cards, hey, book me, I'm Hunter James, And of course, while he's doing that, he would be caught, because he's too busy showboating, he would end up getting caught and getting pinned and whatever. So I thought that was humorous, but then, of course, when that whole segment went, so that segment got pushed to the front and it was just Gary,
And he did. I thought he did a great job as he would.
Oh yeah.
So I meant to ask you this because the Gary segment led into, I think that led into Undeniable and All-Star Special.
Mm-hmm. It did.
When did you find out they were going to shave Hanson's head?
So Hanson's an old school wrestling fan. Like him and Huck love some old school, like Memphis, Continental. Right. And he's running through a gambit of watching a lot of old school Memphis. And in Memphis, man, it was, Lawler, Dundee, somebody was getting their head shaved, right? So, so we knew, I knew in August.
I got you.
So it was, it was, this was planned pretty far out. Right. So, and that was one of those, like, I'd be crazy. Look, it wasn't like it's, and I'm telling you, like, this wasn't my idea. This was their idea. They brought it to us. And we're like, hey, what if? And I was like, dude, I'm not going to tell you no. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
There were some logistics as far as like, hey, there was a couple conversations that were like, wouldn't this be better done at this show instead? Another, like, one of your home promotions, maybe? Do you gain more out of it there? And then I was pitched as to why. Give me a few months and it'll make more sense down the road. But so I was like, okay, cool. It's, but at first it's like, oh, so they're going to, cut your hair. Oh, no, they're going to shave. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's see how it looks, So yeah. And we just thought that added that next level of, look, you're not going to get a belt change, but holy crap, you're going to get, you're going to get this though. And, and you heard the reaction. The crowd was like, wait, what? Like, there was lots of people.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. And that was the second match. We wanted that. So now, originally, we were going to start the show with that.
Oh, wow.
At one point. And I thought, let's give them something else, to start the show. Let's give them. And so that's why we went with Ashton and Ray, who, by the way, Ray Fury was one of the first talents that I was like, he's coming in. Like, I've known Ray for a couple years now, and when we were running the show, I'm like, absolutely got to bring him in, and contacted him, and he was an easy get because dude's as nice as a guy. I wish that we see that guy on AEW or something somewhere at some point. So,
yeah. So at the end of the day, how did it feel to see your baby? Your idea, it comes to fruition. It happens at the end of the night. How did you feel about everything?
The end of that night was probably about running the biggest gambit of emotions that you could possibly have, because there was a part of me that was just like, thank God it's over. Like it's done. Like, thank God. And people are like, oh, how could you even think that way or feel that way? And I'm like, as fun as it was and everything, it consumed a lot of time and a lot of effort for the better part of, a month. I would say that it was, in the beginning it was trickle here, like, oh, kicking this around or whatever. But when it got close, it became a lot of just on and on and on, Now, there's also my wife was there. By the way, my wife doesn't hardly ever go to wrestling shows. She's been to a few. That was her first time being at a Southern honor wrestling type show.
Yeah.
She's been there once when Rich Ward and the Guardians of the Jukebox played. That was it. She'd never been to an actual wrestling show in that building. She's done a couple Southern Frieds, and she's done one landmark show. One. You'll understand. She's done it once.
I do understand, yeah.
But she was, it was like, there were moments where she kind of, like, in hindsight was telling me, like, I saw you, like, when we got close to the end of the Lucha match, like me running up to the sound thing, like I'm like, okay, like here it comes, make sure, and then 1, 2, 3, and she rolls. I mean, I'm already like, there was the excitement of like, dude, she's going to pull this, and she does it. So I'm happy for that. There was, finishes and reactions of certain matches that I particularly was like, yes, like that's what we wanted, that kind of thing. There wasn't any disappointment. Like and that's what people say, it was like, when you do a podcast, when you do a wrestling show, whatever, there's going to be somebody for whatever reason. And here's the funny thing. We do it on our show, right? Somebody's there to critique you, right? To say, it's like, and it was funny because of all people, Gary was the first one. Like the night of the show, he was like, hey, it was too long. I was like, oh, I know. Like you're not telling me anything. And it's like, he's going to give me an honest answer. And he told me the stuff that he was like, hey, I would have, but he's like, but you live in and you learn. He was like, dude, you got a lot to be proud of. The show went great, right. Overall. And I think once the video's edited and everything's to me and I get to go back and watch it, I think I will be even happier. Because once this thing's out there and I'm hoping more people see it, I think that'll be my, my goal, and everybody's laughed. I was like, I want 75 to 100,000 people to watch this.
Wow.
That's my goal. And they're like, you think you'll hit it? And I'm like, yes. I think if enough people get on board and promote it, and push it, and I think the talents will, because I think a lot of talents know, I will put Slim J, and like, here's the thing. There's not a match on the card that I can crap on.
Right.
And so that's the funny thing. So when you sit there and go, I was asking people like, and I asked my son-in-law, by the way, who's not a wrestling fan whatsoever. He was there. And I said, what was your favorite match? If you had to guess, he's from Colombia. He lived in Argentina. Now he lives here, obviously. I said, what would be your favorite match? I assumed Lucha match, right?
Right.
Oh, no. I'm like, which match was your favorite? It was Max, Slim J, and Vari.
Huh, right.
He's like, dude, they were all over. They were flipping or whatever. And I would put that match of Slim J's probably up against a lot of what Slim J's doing right now. I really would. I think it's probably one of his, look, Slim's awesome. And I've been a fan of Slim's for a decade, so, but Joe Black and JD Drake, I mean, I'm like you said, if it hasn't been done before, then people are going to be able to watch it on Facebook. I'm like, and it's going to be free. I mean, people are just going to watch this card if they want to. Like, I'm going to load it onto Patreon early, so everybody who's listening to this, it'll be there early. It'll be really inside baseball. If you're a Lucha Libre Knockouts NFT holder, they're creating a room on Discord, and I'm going to send them the YouTube link, and they're going to have it early. So, but they say you have to prove you own one of their NFTs to get into the room.
Wow.
So that was an idea that a friend of mine came up with. I was like, hey, you should, because he's a big NFT guy. Tim Holman, who Disruptor, he was a lot of help behind the scenes with some ideas and whatever. And that was one of his. He was like, hey, keep them happy, give them this. It's like something unique that their holders will be able to have. So I was like, oh, that's cool. And they loved it, so it'll be there. But like I said, I think once it's out on Facebook, and look, I'm not a fan of YouTube, but everybody at this point knows that. I'm just really not. They beat up wrestling like nobody's business on there. They don't monetize it equally, et cetera, whatever.
Right.
So I go every way I can around of not using YouTube. I just use YouTube as a backup. I load every episode to YouTube just so I have a backup of every episode that'll always be there if I need it. If my computer's wiped, every episode's on YouTube.
Right.
But they're just not listed so nobody can see them.
Right.
Right. But there's so many good things, and I lost your question now because I knew I would.
No, you're good. You're good. No, that's all.
So I hope that was my ultimate goal. Like, I want, if one guy can come back and say, dude, I got a booking in Colorado off of the show. I'd be happy. Like, I'd be so thrilled with it. I really would.
Right. Right.
Because I know a lot of guys put everything they had, into it. Look, the Sideshow Championship is apparently going to be a running thing now. It's not going away. We thought it was going to probably be a one and done, but apparently I was told that, it's supposed to be like the tapped out Sideshow Championship or something at this point. So that belt's not going away. I was like, okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's kind of funny. Trying to, just like I said, I keep going through that card in my head. Proc and Jay, I love those young kids. So again, if you want a backstory, those kids were on the show anyway. So when Will couldn't make it, we moved them. They were originally going to be involved in the undeniable angle.
Right.
They were going to attack Huck to keep him outside the ring, and that's how they would cut his hair, and et cetera, et cetera. We came up with a bunch of things.
Yeah.
I do want to put over like an idea that somebody had, and I know this came up, and I just was like, look, it's on our Patreon, so I'm going to put it out there, like, and I'm going to, all pun intended, full disclosure. So I tried to tell somebody, so there was a thing like, oh, you drew 273. By the way, that was the number that I was given. I didn't count anything. I said, I refused to let it be that Nick said the number was. I said, go to the door person and you give me the number.
Yeah.
That's, and I was told 273. I was like, cool. Yeah. So then it was like, oh yeah, but there were a bunch of comps or whatever, and I was like, okay, well, first of all, we did vet tickets. If you're a wrestling promoter and you're not doing vet tickets, I would really like the explanation as to why.
Right.
I get it if you're in a super limited building, like you're building small and you can't add a ton to it. But you can do 25. You could do whatever. We had 60 because our thing was, look, I mean, Gary's building to hold 1,000. Had they gotten rid of more, I'd have kept giving them more. I'm fully honest about it. I would have.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're not comped if the sponsor tells you to do it. And they're paying for it. Like it's
right. That's right.
So I tried to explain that to somebody. They're like, so you comped 60 people. No, the sponsors covered the cost of the tickets. So those tickets sold. I chose, in our conversation, it was like, hey, how do we, because look, I told you this, the company's in South America. Like I couldn't give tickets to, for them to give away to have people come to the show. So Tim Holman is the one he brought the vet tickets to me. I went to them and said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Are you cool with that? You're compensating as part of the spot? Absolutely. So the way I look at it is a comp ticket, when people do that, and it drives me bananas, and when they say this about what we did, a comp ticket is a fan that was probably going to pay to come to your show, but you gave it to them and let them in for free.
Right.
Those tickets were paid for. And 2, last time I checked, every vet in that chair earned that ticket.
Yeah, 100%.
I had a guy that I talked to, one of the vets came up to me and talked to me. He'd been back from Afghanistan for like 6 months. And he was like, you have no idea how cool this is to be able to get a break. He goes, 6 months ago, I'm in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Now I'm sitting here, and I get to, watch a show. So my argument was, I said to Myron, even if you want to crap on the concept of the 60 comps for we still outdrew everybody for that weekend. I'm like, I was still over 200. Like, I mean, and it wasn't like, I was happy it was funny. Once we had the sponsorship and everything was covered, I was like, dude, I'm not worried so much about attendance anymore. I wanted 1,000 people to show up.
Right.
But we'll go back to what we talked about earlier, right? We all are fully aware. If you're drawing 1,000 people, I don't know if that's even responsible at this point, is it?
I don't know. There's some wrestling companies drawing 20,000.
I mean, but outdoors and I get it. That's a whole other argument at this point. But I mean, when you have a small building, like, it is what it is. But I just was like, hey, look, even with the vet tickets, we were still over, well over 200. So
Yeah.
I was happy, and I said, I will take the handshakes and the thank yous that I got from all of the vets that came up to me and was like, because my wife was doing the tickets at the door, and she was pointing out throughout the night if somebody would come up to her and ask, she was pointing out me and Myron so they could come up and talk to us.
Mm. Mm.
So I did my best every time, to stop. It didn't matter what I was doing. I tried to say thank you for coming out. I thank you for your service. I was helping people to their seat, that kind of stuff, because it was funny. It was like I sat people, like I assigned the seats, so I'm like, I knew when somebody showed me a ticket, they were, hey, can you help me find my seats? I'm like, oh, well, first of all, thank you for your service. And they're like I know you're a vet because of where your seats are.
Yeah.
And so then I took them to their seats, that kind of stuff or whatever. But so I wanted to get that out there because that would just drove me bananas when people got into the comps and the attendance or whatever. It is what it is. But again, they were all paid for, so I don't particularly care.
Right. There were 4 shows in upstate South Carolina last Saturday. You outdrew 3 of them combined. If you combine the attendance for 3 of them, these are regular running shows. You outdrew them. So kudos. I mean, that's a great 215, 273, 275, 200. Yeah, great crowd. Great.
I was happy. I mean, I just wanted the crowd to, like I said, I wanted everybody to be there to enjoy it, have fun, which it seemed they did. Because, I asked kids. I particularly went up to kids after the show, like, hey, did you have fun? Yeah. What'd you like? And they tell me, I asked my daughter, who's not a big wrestling fan, hey, what was your favorite match? And hers was the Lucha match.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, so it wasn't, and I'm like, wasn't, but that's what people got to grasp ahead of. That was also the reasons of the different types of matches. How often on our shows do we talk about, like, wrestling is, if you're putting something out there for everybody, like, I get it. WWE gets crapped on a lot because everybody doesn't like a lot of what they do. Right. But if you really look hard enough, there's something for everybody on their show.
Correct.
So that's something to point out, and that's kind of what we were shooting for. So we got it. We knew that maybe somebody who, if the Lucha match was your cup of tea, then Prockentechi probably wasn't.
Right.
But then again, she wasn't like, but she's a casual. I mean, casual as casual gets as a fan. She's a total Bellas fan, total Divas fan. Like that's her, that's her groove, right? So I mean, so for her to go, like, guess which match she liked the most? The one that had women in it.
Right. Well, there you go.
Totally makes sense, right? So anyway,
So I guess here's the big question, and I know you're still in the holding pattern or whatever, but what is next? I mean, you've done it once. From hearing you talk, like, it's hard to fathom doing this once a month. I know you don't want to do that.
No interest in running regularly. No.
But do we need to block out some dates for next September?
If first of all, I have had 1 week, and I jokingly, I can't remember, and I apologize totally up front. It was the next day I was having conversations with Dylan and Todd both. It was really a lot of like, hey, what did you learn? What did a lot of that kind of stuff. And I said, will you do it again? They said, will you do it again? And my response was, ask me in 6 months.
Right.
However, the Patreon members will probably smirk a little bit when I say I don't know if September would be the dates I would block out. Mm-hmm. Maybe August or October. Maybe. I have an urge that I would say, would I want to do it again? Because here's the thing. Here's something about me. Mm-hmm. If I do something and I think I can do it better, the odds are I'm probably going to do it again just to prove that I can do it better.
Right.
Now, what I mean by that is I would still not be an idiot. Like if Todd Sexton, if Dylan Freimeyer, Matt Hankins, and all these parties, like all these talents, and here's the thing, I'm hoping I need all new talents because they're all gone to bigger and better things at this point.
Right.
That would be my goal. But if not, Like, lots of people would come back. A lot of people would change. Like we've kicked around ideas of, hey, if we did this again, what if we did it in Landmark next time? And if we did it a third year, what if we did it at Southern Fried's building? It became a traveling annual show. Like if we did it once a year, but we moved its home from place to place, and then the next year maybe it's Viral's building, or
Right.
then it's then we head further south, or so so that's something like, has it been kicked around? I'm more likely today to say yes
Right.
than I was 4 days ago. 4 days ago, I was like, probably not. But today I'd be like, I think, because we could shave, like I would probably shave a match or two off. I would probably be more selective. I mean, as far as not selective is probably the right word, but it would just be like, you'd probably have less three-way, triple threats and four ways and that kind of stuff. It probably go more straight, title matches, and to do I do away with the whole like champions versus all these belts, and I don't know. I mean, like a lot of that stuff would have to be kicked around and see. But here the beauty of it was, the thought crossed my mind of how much better would it be known if 6 months out everybody knew, and the bookers could kind of play along.
Yeah.
Like
Wow.
they could plan in their booking, like, hey, as we get there, this is a stepping stone of like to the next show of ours, or
Right. They could almost plan your show as part of their storytelling.
right. If we're gonna use one of your matches, let's make it a piece of the puzzle as we're going, through that process. So that I think that could be interesting. But that would probably the only way I'd be interested in doing it, is if something we had further, bigger timetable to work with. I would want more, like I said, there's so many things I wrote down about, like, I would do this different. I would do this different, shorten it, obviously at that point, do it on a Saturday versus a Friday, start at 7 instead of 8 on a Saturday. Look, Gary's building has a million advantages from Sunday. The odds are it would be in that building. If it happened again, it would be in that building. So, I mean, I'm full honesty about it. But then somebody was like, hey, what about Landmark? And I was like, okay, that's not a terrible idea. That's actually pretty good.
Right.
The history of that building alone, would be like, hey, that's kind of cool. So there's lots of that stuff, I think that we could fill as we went along and figure out. But today I'm closer to yes than I was 4 days ago.
Well, if there's any interest in the Double Dropkick show sponsoring a titles match from the Carolinas that perhaps the good folks of Georgia don't get to see that often, if that's something on the table, let me just throw that out there. If you'd be interested.
Oh yeah. Well, see, and that was the other thing. We this kind of was like it was a drop. It never got beyond fruition in the sense of like it was a conversation, but we did get into that conversation of what if we could find a champion from Tennessee, one from Alabama, one from Florida, one from South Carolina, North Carolina. So then it becomes a Southeast show, not a Georgia show.
Right.
Now that would create lots of obstacles for, lots of people that, I was like, hey, I personally would love to have these people on the show, but now it gets really restrictive because I don't, you know what I mean? Because then it's like, okay, well now there's just not the spots that there were on that show. So that does create a little bit of an obstacle there from that point. And it'd be, I don't have as many contacts in, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Florida. The Florida one was easy. We actually had the match. Like it could have happened. Like, it was a promotion going like, oh yeah, we'll send you our champion, no problem. And I was like, okay, cool. That was through Gary. It was a whole other, thing. It was, but it was, just, yeah. I mean, I think that if it happens, I still think like there's the concept of champion versus champions. We've talked about that. We talked about that as an option. Like the problem is, of course, losing, winning, two champions. Oh, I can't lose. Or if everybody can't lose, then you're kind of like, this isn't even worth doing at that point, So.
Right. And if you give enough runway, you can make some really cool partnerships. And I think that was one thing I was hoping was that um, I was really hoping that a promotion or two would really use your show to kind of springboard some things. I think they all did. They all did well, but there was almost not hesitancy. I don't want to say that, but I think you would find in your next show a promotion would really seize and say, well, hey, we're going to take advantage of this to really push what we're doing through the platform of the Tapped Out
So
podcast.
there are things that I know. So in 2 months, 3 months, there will be things that launched out of that show. So that's kind of one of those, there are more. I mean, I think about it. Like David and Judas continued their Southern Fried story on that show. Like it hyped up their next confrontation, because they are going to have to face each other again, at that Southern Fried. There's more meat to that bone and All Star Undeniable and stuff as well. So that's all I can say, about that. But I mean, there's lots of stuff there. And everybody else, I think, is just more of, listen, Disruptor has every intentions, from my understanding, they probably are going to run again. Think about this. Mac lost the belt and he didn't get pinned.
Yeah.
If Disruptor runs again, don't you think Mac has a legitimate complaint? Like the demand a rematch with Slim? Come on, things happen for a reason, folks.
If there ever was a wrestler to cut a promo, being mad about that, that's like Taylor, that's tailor made for him.
Okay, the guy that came up with that, I'm gonna, right? I mean, like, I don't do that often, but like, come on. I was like, literally, this, it writes itself, man. Come on, how hard should this? Let's not overcomplicate things. This is easy.
Right, wrestling is not. It's not complicated.
And by the way, since it's just us friends here, right?
Right.
The night of that show, if this match happens, like, it's already booked. Like, I literally walked up to one of the promoters and said, hey, if they don't run again, I need this match to happen somewhere else. Right. Will you let that match happen? Well, can they defend this belt on your show? Yes, absolutely. Who wouldn't want Slim J and Mac for 2 belts?
Right.
That's a no-brainer, folks. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said for keeping that kind of thing in your head of like, and it wasn't like I did anything great. It was just, I just asked. Honestly, if you want a lesson in wrestling, I've learned over the last years, is just ask.
Yeah.
You don't make, you can't make shots you don't shoot.
That's right. That's exactly
There are people we asked for stuff and some said no. Okay, well, guess what we did? We didn't overstep our bounds. We just asked for something they couldn't give us. And then it was like, okay, well, if you can't do this, what about this? What about this? And you backpedal your way until you, until you get to what they can do and they're willing to do. But at the end of the day, I can't put over like this show again. I've said it probably, this is going to be like number 3 or 4, the third or fourth time I've said this. This show wasn't about us. It wasn't. And then, look, I specifically went to Gary beforehand, and Gary doesn't listen because Gary's Gary. Like, I don't want our names mentioned. I don't want, like, this isn't about us. This is about the talents on the show, the promoters, the bookers who helped, all of those things. And, at the end, that's who put the show on. Mm-hmm. It's like saying, like, I threw an idea and a concept out there, and all these other people really it helped to put those pieces into play, and then like it's almost like the promoters and the bookers put the chess pieces on, but then the chess game played itself. The talents actually did everything. I was like, this so they deserve all of the any reward that comes out of it, dude. It was them. It wasn't us. It was them. So.
Right. Well, once again, just man, congratulations. It was a good show. It was a success. Period. End of discussion. From everything I've heard from all the workers and all the promotions, they were all very happy with how everything went down. We've got the exclusive, folks. Set your calendars. It's going to happen. It's going to happen again, and I can't wait. I'll be there. I'll make that drive to Canton for you guys, definitely.
Well, I didn't commit. I said I'm more likely
listen, I'm pulling for Landmark. Landmark's probably an hour closer for me, but wherever it is, wherever in the Georgia Wrestling Universe, the 2nd annual Tapped Out.
We were joking. Is it Hell Freezes Over again? Is that what
That's
you?
a
I
good
mean,
question.
because
What?
you can't repeat it twice, right? So, like I don't
Right.
again. Last but not, I'm gonna let you cut it out on the end, but I clearly want again. Like I can't go through like every promotion involved and thank them enough. Every promoter, every booker. Like I said, Dylan and Todd and Hankins, Hancock. Like, look, I mean, listen. So it's as simple as like if Hancock doesn't agree, right? Then All Star's not there with their belts.
Right.
So
Right.
I mean, because they were other champions. I mean, for other reasons. We talked about it, like Chip and Kyle. I mean, it was their building, but they had to be elsewhere. So, but it wasn't a lot. It was a lot of everybody's yeses. Like, hey, would you do this? You're interested in this? And it was for me, like what I took as far as for the compliment that I took most is the like 2 days later, John Davis messaging me and telling me how much fun he had.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and he wasn't the only one. Obviously, there were other guys messaging me like, "Hey, it was awesome. Had fun. Had a blast. Blah blah blah." Like that's the kind of stuff I'm like, okay, I get the promoters have stories and they're doing like, but let's always try to remember at the end of the day, let's try to have some fun with it and stuff like that. And if nothing else, we were like, okay, let's be an outlet where those guys can just go out there and have fun with it and
Right.
have a match and to figure out like we all can know like you got to get to the end, but let's get creative on getting to the end and let's just make that happen. That's all. That's it. It's wrestling should be fun. There's no point like there's no reason to crap on anybody at this point, right?
No, that's right. That's right.
Um, it was funny because somebody said something about Rampage, and I mentioned this on our show last week. Dude, if we had not been running, I would have been at the Rampage show.
Hmm.
Like there was so much talent, like the approved and Chip and Kyle, and at one point, like I said, Logan was on the, and that happened, but there was lots of talents on that card. I was like, dude, I want to go see that show, but
Right.
unfortunately, I'm running that night, so so I couldn't go. Um, but there wasn't ever a time that I don't want Rampage to to run like to not draw I mean they were like dude they're 3 hours away for crying out loud.
Right.
It goes
Right.
back to like hey how about this like WWE like I know people are crapping on that Extreme Rules pay per view. I don't know why I watched it. And I actually kind of thought it was fun. So you don't have to pick and to choose here, guys. We can but anyway that's a whole sidebar. We'll get on a different show. Um,
Right. Right.
but yeah,
Right.
so I'm happy and at the end of the day I'm happy. Everything was fine. Everything went fun, and we all had a good time. And hey, maybe next year.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so happy that I'm so happy we were able to do this. I know we went way longer than you and Myron normally do, but that's totally cool. I really feel like, our supporters, our patrons, man, they're just amazing. And I know you guys and we do, try to put out some really good content. And so I'm very happy, man. I think I threw all my questions at you, man. You went into really great detail, and I hope like this was a really good mind dump for you.
Uh,
And now you can start planning for next year. And my only prayer coming into this was like, man, Lord, I don't want to get the itch. I don't want to run the show. I got stuff going on. I don't want to get and I'm thankful. I'm happy for you. But let me just state categorically, there will be no double drop kick show happening.
yeah, I mean it's look, I mean, who knows? Maybe next year we do it together. You never know.
Oh my. Oh my. Hey, listen, I am up for anything, but I'm telling you, I admire the people that do this month in, month out. It takes so
Yeah,
much work, and it gives you a whole new appreciation for guys like Todd Sexton and Dylan and Gary and all those
yeah. I
folks.
mean, think that dude Dylan, doing what he does for a living. He's engrossed in wrestling all the time. They've got their
Right.
big show coming up. I mean, Hankins is running PCW and Booking Anarchy, so he's doing 3 shows a month. Because doesn't he run
Wow.
every other week at PCW and now or whatever? Todd and
Yeah.
them are running. They're about to be back into their groove. They took that break after their big blow off show. Then they'll be back every 2 weeks. So he's running the show every 2 weeks. And I
Wow.
mean, just I mean, I know Viral doesn't run as frequent. IWE doesn't run as frequently. Mucha Lucha doesn't quite run as frequently. So those lots of those pieces around there. Whew, it's crazy to think about. But yeah, I just can't even. I couldn't if I couldn't imagine having a full-time regular job and doing now. There are things that it would be easier, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, because you're
Mm-hmm.
booking so far. If you've got your storylines and you're not having to go out and find talents like
Right.
because you're booking them out ahead of time, hopefully. So
Yeah.
there's lots of. I
You
think
got like
those.
your regular crew, your regular roster,
Yeah,
and
yeah, you're not digging. That was the hard part. There was a lot of that of like, oh my god, we got to find somebody, and it's scrambling, and everybody else was booking and that kind of thing. So yeah, so I mean, I think there's some things that it's easier, but then no, it's not. It would be way harder to do it on a regular basis because you're gonna have the headaches constantly of this guy not showing up or this guy can't do it, et cetera, et cetera. Um, or this guy just took another booking for whatever reason, so he's not at your show. So that's the headaches of like I don't want on a regular basis by any stretch of the imagination. But I can't again. I mean, I always say this and I say this and I really mean it. That show doesn't happen without the talents on the show and the
Mm.
bookers and the promoters and Gary letting us use the building and Ox with the ring and all of those things like the hard work was done by a lot of other people. Trust
Yeah.
me, it was really was in my opinion. So if you're, there really wasn't a ton of involvement in the match part other than like me bouncing ideas of like matches, like the participants. Yes, I was involved in, but a lot of it, I mean, it was like so yeah. But anyway, as far as the matches themselves, if like, oh, if you hated that match, I mean, I didn't do a lot with it, guys. I mean, but at the same time, I think if you're crapping on any match on that card, I don't know. I mean, how much of a fan are you? I mean, I thought they were all pretty good.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. There was something for everybody. New matchups you don't see. I enjoyed it. It was good. It
Yeah.
was really good.
So anyway,
So job well done, my brother. Job well done.
I appreciate it, man. I really do.
From one podcaster to another, just man, I just appreciate like I appreciate the amount of work you put into that. Absolutely.
Well, like I said, it was for everybody else. It wasn't. I mean, I know, look, everybody can, whatever. I don't even get into the like, the negative stuff that was said, whatever. I'm just like, it was for everybody else. I just had fun doing it once because I wanted, say I did it once, and we did it. So, like I said, at this point, it happened. We're happy that it pulled off, and as long as the fans and the wrestlers and everybody in the was happy at the end of the day, success.
That's right.
Success.
That's right.
So
That's right. Well, thanks to Nick. Thanks to all of our patrons, the Tapped Out patrons, and the Double Drop Kick Show patrons. Hey, Nick, for the Double Drop Kick Show people who are listening who may not be Tapped Out patrons, how can they go and find you and
it's easy.
support you on Patreon?
Patreon.com/tapped out pod. I mean, we listen, if you're on Double Drop Kick and you've never heard us, dude, hey, we're welcoming both and vice versa, dude. I always tell everybody, if you've not listened to you, I'm jealous, to be honest with you. You put out way more stuff than us. I mean, hands down, I don't even hide that fact. I'm like, hey, they put out a ton of stuff, and it makes me jealous. I'm just like, I got to figure out how to
We,
way to catch up.
we put out more Patreon stuff than regular stuff. Now, because
Right.
I pretty much, record every day or try to
Yeah. Hey,
on the
dude, you
way to
get me
work.
almost every day. I come downstairs and I put you on, boom, and listen to it. So it's my regular routine when you drop it. I mean, I listen to it. So, yeah, but you can, if you're on Patreon already, if you're following Double Dropkick, we're just Tapped Out Wrestling Podcast. But if you're at Tapped Out Pod is everything on any social media, anything. It's always at Tapped Out Pod. And the website, of course, is tappedoutpod.com, right? So it doesn't get much
Easy
simpler
to
than that.
remember. Easy to
Universal
remember.
branding, universal branding. And hey, listen, vice versa, dude. Plug your stuff while you're here, man.
So, doubledropkick.com. We're on patreon.com/double dropkick. And our podcast is on all the major brands and everything. And like I was just saying, Mark and I are both working crazy schedules. And so we don't put out a lot of regular podcasts, but Patreon stuff, it's about every day. If you want to get into the minutia of Carolina's independent wrestling, this is the place to come. And I try to talk, I don't know how you feel. When we first started, there were not a lot of wrestling podcasts. And now everybody's got a wrestling podcast. You guys have done a great job of finding your niche and building really an international audience. And what we decided, or what I decided, was like, man, nobody's really talking about independent wrestling in the weeds with it. So that's kind of the direction I went, and it's been a lot of fun and made a lot of good friends through it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. When we did ours, we'll get out of here after that. But you're right. When we started, dude, it was everybody and their brother was. We were doing Raw recaps, SmackDown recaps, blah blah blah. Because a lot of people ask me, can you explain how you're at episode 780 something already in 5 years? I'm like, because there was a stretch, man. We were doing 5 and 6 podcasts a week.
Wow.
We had affiliates, like, dude, we had 3 other shows like on our network. I mean, like, and stuff. And I just came down to the core of, this one would fall off, because if you can make it 6 months in the podcast world, you've done well. Most people don't.
Right.
6 months and they burn out and they're gone.
Right.
And then it took time to figure out, like you said, like, look, there came a day where I was like, okay, I don't want to do reviews anymore. We were doing interviews, and then I found the challenges with interviews. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know that I want to do these anymore. So we moved, and the structure just became, I just want to talk big topics.
Yep.
Because I feel like, but what we try to do, and everybody's like, so why do you do the indie talk section at the end when 90% of your audience or whatever, is outside of Georgia? Again, because I see so many talents in Georgia that if all these other people are listening, when they get to the end, like, look, if 57,000 people watched last week, if
Right.
10% stay and get to the end, 5,700 people, still are going to hear me talk about the independent scene in Georgia, and maybe somebody hears a name and they Google them, YouTube them, whatever, and they see them, and then they get, so I just felt like I owed it to the people who are good to us here in Georgia to, try to get them that exposure, which is why we try to run the commercials, the stuff on the show, like the advertising for the promotions and
Right.
stuff. So I think that's us, again, trying to say, like, we're trying to get that exposure out there, because look, it's cool to go on like a podcast now, and you agree, we could go all night talking about this, where I'm about to say, but the cool thing to do right now is to go on your Twitter, go on your Facebook, go on your podcast, and crap all over everything.
Right. Right.
It's the cool thing to do. Or look, you can be subjective about it. Like I always tell people, how many times you've heard on a show where we go, in my opinion, or, it wasn't for me. Like, I get it. But you have to be willing to go, like, I don't see how anybody could like that. Everybody, like, give you an example. We're going to talk about this week. Did you hear the Pop Alexa Bliss got at the pay-per-view last night? And I think
I haven't had a chance to watch it.
it was like, my answer is this. I am so not into that gimmick. But when she came out and the pop happened, I looked at my wife and I go, clearly it's more over than I thought.
Right. Right.
Kids love it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, cool. The ability in wrestling to be able to look at something and say, it's not for me, but I get it. Like, I understand.
Right.
Everybody, I think, that's a lesson to be learned, instead of just crapping all over everything just because it's the in thing to do. Because that's really at the core, I think, what it is. It's become the cool thing to do. So anyway, I'm not going to keep going on that. So that's a whole other show.
No, that's right. That's right. And I hope, like, I would love to monthly, bi-monthly, me and you, maybe Joe from Suplexes and Microphones, and Caleb from Evolve Review, like to do like a podcast united or something, where we just throw out
I'm down, man.
On the table. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I'm completely down with that. So if I know a lot of those guys are on our circle of Patreon, so he just threw the gauntlet down. So let's just make it happen, right? Let's just forget about it, make it happen. So
that's right.
So,
well,
man,
listen, I'm gonna turn the tables on you, Nick, because if I got nothing and you got nothing, what time is it?
It's time to tap out.